We learned this week that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., third-party candidate in the 2024 U.S. presidential election, son of this guy...
I run for the presidency because I want the Democratic Party and the United States of America to stand for hope.
And therefore, sentient concept of diminishing returns is...
So I pulled over and I picked up the bear and put him in the back of my van because I was going to skin the bear, and it was very good condition, and I was going to put the meat in my refrigerator. And you can do that in New York State. You can get a bear tag.
Long and frankly extremely weird even by RFK Jr. standard story short, we learned at last of a solution to a riddle that has bewildered New York City for 10 years, as was first reported thus.
Florence Slatkin says she was walking her dog this morning when she saw something furry underneath the bushes. Police say the 3-foot-long black bear cub had stab and slash wounds and appears to have been dumped there. Adding to the mystery, Slatkin says the baby bear was lying on top of this bicycle, which police confiscated as evidence.
And yes, it does seem very odd to allow an entire decade to elapse between the discovery of a dead bear in peculiar circumstances and an explanation of the mystery, like why... the big pause. We learned that it was indeed RFK Jr. who had dumped the bear after thinking better of his initial and just completely normal idea of driving it home to skin it, and had thrown in the bicycle as well, though it is maddeningly unclear as of this broadcast whether Kennedy hoped to create the impression that the bear had been hit by the bicycle or had been riding it. Either way, how very unlike a Kennedy to flee the scene of an accident, conjure a bizarre exculpatory alibi, and then spend years refusing to explain what actually happened. Anyway, this choice of music is going to sound really clever in about 20 seconds. Hang in there.
That is fascinating. Can you tell me more? Wow, I'd love to hear it.
Wait for it. So, if we learned that RFK Jr.'s support may have dwindled to that cohort of Americans who can't see why you wouldn't keep a roadkill bear in your car for a day with a view to skinning and eating it, and then dump it in a city park with a bicycle when you decide you can't be bothered, so probably only about 60 million people, am I right? We learned that the Democratic Party hopes that America's bear dumpers are outnumbered by people who might warm to this guy.
I was born in West Point, Nebraska. I lived in Butte, a small town of 400, where community was a way of life. Growing up, I spent the summers working on the family farm. My mom and dad taught us, show generosity towards your neighbors and work for a common good.
All right, Tom Sawyer, pace yourself. We learned that the Democrats had unveiled their vice presidential pick, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. So write this... is by the Replacements, who were from Minnesota, and it's from their 1985 album, which was actually called Tim. And while we'll concede that it isn't in 3/4 time, which would really have sealed the deal, you know, waltz, waltz, etc., but you can't have everything, the track is called Left of the Dial, which we learned is where opponents of the Harris Waltz ticket believe the governor's politics are located. Yes. Barely had Waltz been introduced that we learned that, far from the mild-mannered former teacher and high school football coach he was pitched as, the governor is in fact a deep-cover sleeper agent for Al-Shabaab. I know, right. We learned this from former Donald Trump advisor and third henchman on the right in any given James Bond film, Stephen Miller.
That means under the Harris-Walz plan, they're going to turn the entire Midwest into Mogadishu.
And we learned all the evidence we needed to hear in support of this in no way insane assertion from noted conservative thinker and future star of cucumber spiralizer infomercials, Jesse Watters.
This guy changed the flag of this state to look more like Somalia. What is wrong with this guy?
We learned when we looked into it that this is not actually the case, shocked as you are and so forth. We learned that while Minnesota had indeed adopted a new flag on Walz's watch, it was chosen not by the governor, but by the State Emblems Redesign Commission from designs submitted by the Minnesotan public, and that the new Minnesota flag looks really nothing very much like the Somali one, being an 8-pointed star on a dark blue background overlapping a pale blue field, as opposed to a 5-pointed star on a plain blue background. Do we have to explain everything? But we learned that, worst of all, with Walz in charge, things had changed.
And these are just facts, Mary Catherine Ham. I mean, if you know Minnesota, and I don't well, especially Milwaukee, it's changed.
From which we learned that Fox News' Laura Ingraham doesn't know Minnesota quite well enough to know that Milwaukee isn't in it. But we learned that the Republican Party had lit upon another promising attack line, Donald Trump's own press secretary Caroline Leavitt sallying forth as follows, as will now be read by Monocle's promising attack line's desk chief, Fernando Augusto Pacheco.
Walz embraces policies allowing convicted felons to vote.
Yes, imagine convicted felons being allowed to vote. They'll be wanting to run for president next. But returning to the theme of places with flags that look vaguely similar, we learned of a resumption of trans-Tasman hostilities in the form of this unseemly and frankly outrageous outburst from New Zealand's Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon.
The correspondence was being directed to an Australian minister overseas. And what I'd say to you in my dealings with Australians, it always pays to be incredibly simple and clear and use English.
We learned that Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese had stopped short of ordering a general mobilisation, at least for the moment.
Christopher Luxon's a friend of mine, but I often think that whilst we both speak English, sometimes we need interpreters with the Kiwi accent.
And as the region teeters on the brink, we'll close with analysis from Monocle's Trans-Tasman Affairs Desk Chief, David Stevens.
Yeah, I'm not really all that interested, sorry.
Food for thought. Thanks, David. For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Muller.